Hi. I'm thinking that one of these days I should just bite the bullet and host an entire event that's dedicated to how much you love criminals. Don't deny it. Don't deny it. Raise your hand if you watch true crime. So I'm just running this idea in my head, and it's a theory. I tried to posit at the end of the Bonnie and Clyde event, and I got some pushback from the attendees at the live event. But just look at how we treat criminals. After we hear someone committed this heinous crime, what do? We offer them endless interviews. We make documentaries, write books, TV shows, uh, movies, forums. How many YouTube channels are there out there dedicated to just crime? There are groupies, there are fan clubs, and all sorts of things. How many women marry serial killers or other criminals or want to be associated with this person because of the amount of attention we give criminals and how we elevate them and turn them into stars? Have you ever heard the term hybristophilia? It's a $15 word about how much we as a society adore criminals. So today we're going to be focused on one criminal, Charles Sobhraj. I read two books while preparing for this event, but I refused to bring any books about that creature into this house. I refused to feed the machine and pay any money for his books. I just read them for free online. I'll show you the books I consulted. So now I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started, okay? Okay. So, okay. So, as I said earlier, I'll show you the books I read while preparing for this event. Serpentine, Charles Sobhraj's Reign of Terror from Europe to South Asia by Thomas Thompson. And then I read this one, Life and Crimes of Charles Sobhraj by Richard Neville and Julie Clark. Both quite interesting reads, but there are some aspects to both books that are diametrically opposed because this one is told from Charles Sobhraj's perspective and he's a pathological liar, whilst the previous one, I guess, is closer to the truth. They tell different versions of the same events in his life. Anyway, let's begin. So, World War II officially ended in 1945, and those who survived and recovered experienced a period of post-war euphoria, particularly for the victorious countries. So the US and many Western European countries enjoyed significant post-war economic booms, and it was known as the golden age of capitalism. Life seemed good, and people were learning to live again after the war. Vietnam had been a French colony for decades, but after World War II, there was this strong desire for independence by the Vietnamese people, and they were led by this fella, Ho Chi Minh, aka Uncle Ho. So they successfully defeated the French in northern Vietnam. Southern Vietnam, however, was under US control, and America had no plans of relinquishing control of the territories. And this and a series of other events would lead eventually to the Vietnam War. Young Americans and Europeans were still exhausted, having just come out of World War II, and here was Uncle Sam setting the groundwork up for another war. Yeah, there was no appetite for it. And around this time, there was quite an anti-establishment sentiment among the youth, and the youth counterculture was quite prevalent. And one of these anti-establishment groups was known as hippies. Hipsters or hippies were fiercely opposed to war and consumer culture and capitalism. They wanted peace, free love, and to let go of the traditional rules imposed by Western society. They were very much rebels. Um, this movement had a major influence and effect on the pop culture, music, fashion, and media that emerged at this time. Time bell bottoms and long hair and funny colors. Time when music by artists like the Bob Dylans and the Beatles, Janis Joplin, the Rolling Stones, the Mamas and the Papas, what my father calls drug-free music, which is quite ironic, especially considering that he studied in the US and was there around this time, and he thought people weren't doing drugs. Anyway, so the hippie movement was widespread in the US and in Europe, Australia, Japan, Mexico, and Brazil. And their pursuit of alternative lifestyles included an interest in sexual liberation, psychedelic drugs, vegetarian diets, and Eastern philosophy. This led thousands of youth to go on a pilgrimage of sorts and to immerse themselves in this lifestyle, and thus the so-called hippie trail was born. Traveling this route was not just an escape or just search for adventure. At the time, it was considered a political act by the youth. And this search for adventure and such is what paved the way for yoga, karma, nirvana, and all such concepts to get imbibed into Western culture. They brought it back with them. So now we share a video by one of the hippie trailers, and then we'll continue.
It was the end of 1977. Like a lot of people at that time, I had the dream of traveling abroad. So I decided to take a semester off to travel to Europe. I told my parents about it, and they were guardedly agreeable. I did not tell them that I had a secret agenda, that I might travel and keep going overland from Istanbul to Kathmandu. The trek from Istanbul to Kathmandu had become known as the hippie trail or the hippie highway, a slang name for it. I showed up and hopped on the plane with my little backpack and 4 shirts and 3 pairs of pants, and then I took off. And had never been over there, didn't have any idea where I was going or what I was doing. The first 4 months were basically in Europe. It was about time to come home. So I went down to the communications center in Athens, Greece. I had to wait for 4 hours to get a line just to call home. And my timing was pretty good, except for the fact that my dad had stepped out for a while. He said, I'm staying another semester. I'm going to keep traveling. She says, oh my gosh, she says, you're going to have to call back and tell your father I can't face it. And I said, I can't call back because my boat leaves in 2 hours and it took me 4 hours to do this boat. She said, you owe me. I was off. Istanbul, there was a little yogurt shop and kind of delicatessen, and it was kind of a gathering place for Westerners. And you could go in and there was a bulletin board that would say, looking for someone to travel to so-and-so, or it might have a tip, don't go this way, or try this, or just all kind of information. You know, no internet back then. This was as good as it got. Particularly, I remember going through this mountain pass. The sun is coming up for the day. We're in our little bus going one way. There's a camel caravan coming through the pass from the other way. I mean, it's just heart-stopping. It was so cool.
Get the sense of a bygone era, didn't you? I don't think we'll ever get to see the world we did. And so while this was happening on the other side of the world in the 1940s, there was a teenage girl named Song working in the rice paddies in a remote village in Vietnam. She came from extreme poverty. She'd lost both her parents and could barely survive. So she decided to move to the city. Today we call it Ho Chi Minh City, but back then it was called Saigon, and Saigon was the Paris of the Orient, the bustling metropolis with shops, opium dens, dance halls, casinos, and brothels with names like the House of 500 Girls. Song was described as an iron butterfly. So in hippie lingo, an iron butterfly is an attractive woman who seems strong on the outside, but is mentally unstable, emotionally unstable, and uses psychedelic drugs. So Song got a job at a men's boutique in the city, and her employer was an attractive Indian fella, a tailor named Hotchan Sobhraj. One day after work, her boss invited her out to the casino, and soon after she became his mistress and moved into his apartment. And to his dismay, she was soon pregnant, and on April 6, 1944, she gave birth to a son whom they named Gurmukh Sobhraj. He eventually changed his name to Charles when he was 15 years old. So, according to one version of the story, they lived in a grand mansion, and another version of the story says that they lived in abject squalor in a tiny one-bedroom shack. So the family lived together for a while, and at this time, Vietnam was quite unstable because first the Japanese army took over, and then British, and then the French troops took control of Saigon. The atmosphere was always tense and fearful, and there were door-to-door assassinations going on all the time. And one consequence of all these Western armies passing through was that many mixed-race Eurasian babies were born to Vietnamese peasant girls. And these mixed-race children resented their peasant roots, but also resented Europeans for not fully accepting them. And this resentment undercurrent would be something Charles would tap into when growing up. One day when Charles was 3 years old and his mom was on her second pregnancy, Charles's father got back from a business trip to India and announced that he had married an Indian wife. And Song wept. She was devastated. So she packed up her bags and left with her son immediately. She worked as a prostitute for a while, according to one version of the book. And within months, she met a very kind and loving French officer named Alphonse Darrow, who simply adored her. He married her and adopted her unborn child formally, a little girl whom they named Anne Marie. Charles, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with Alphonse, no matter how caring Alphonse was to him. He had grown up in a mansion with servants, according to one version of the book, and now he'd been downgraded to a three-bedroom apartment in the military barracks. Nope. And so, according to one of the books, his affluenza flared up because he was allergic to poverty. And so every day he would run away and go back to his father's house, and then he'd get dragged back to the barracks where his mother was. And it got quite embarrassing after a while. He wouldn't even let his stepfather carry him. He was an ungovernable child. Even as a toddler, he saw himself as an equal to all the adults around him, had quite a sense of entitlement, and believed he deserved the best things in life. So it was very difficult for his mom and stepdad. So when the family got posted back to France, his mother left him in Saigon with his father. First of all, he was too difficult. Secondly, he'd been born out of wedlock, so he didn't have a nationality or passport. His father's Indian wife, Jeeta, had moved in by now, and she basically kicked Charles to the curb. And so from age 4, he lived on the streets of Saigon along with all the other street urchins, many of whom were abandoned mixed race children. His mom returned 3 years later with 3 other kids, and she took full custody of him. He was still a brat and he kept running away. Uh, so much so that his mom would tie him to his bed at night just to keep him. And eventually she took him to Paris with her and placed him in a boarding school when he was 9 years old. He became a chronic bedwetter, refused to learn French, and was clinging to this fantasy version of his childhood where he had a very happy and loving home in Saigon. His mom had quite a crazy remedy for his bedwetting, which was to tie his genitals at night. So school was hard for him because he was the only Asian boy there. Combined with the bedwetting, he was an outcast at school. He was the butt of racist jokes and thus begun a lifelong hatred of Westerners. He was left at boarding school all by himself during the holidays because his mom and husband kept getting posted all over the world. So he ate alone, slept alone, and played alone. He was a very lonely child. By the time he saw his mom 1 year later, he didn't recognize her. And then, to his surprise, when she spoke to him in Vietnamese, he realized that he couldn't remember the language. He was now fluent in French. His mom had come to take him because the family was moving to Africa, and she then informed him that his biological father had died, and the news crushed it. By this time, his mom had 6 other kids, so now in total 7 kids, when the family moved to Dakar, Senegal. Charles became a hero to his 6 younger siblings by stealing candy and toys for them. His stepfather had severe PTSD and was knocked out on a cocktail of drugs half the time. His mom was still working as a prostitute, and she went out every night gambling and to meet her clients. And so Charles would take his siblings out on the town at night where they would break into shops and steal things. They remained in Senegal for 2.5 years, and he found out that his father was still alive. His mom had lied to him. And so he became extremely difficult to have around. Misbehaved at school, was a truant. His stepdad got him a job and he got fired the same day for trying to burn the place down. He snuck on multiple ships trying to get back to Saigon to be with his father. Living with him got so insufferable that when the family returned to France, his stepfather got him a French passport, hoping to just send him back to Vietnam. And around this time, his biological father happened to be visiting Paris for a 1 month business trip. And so, after some negotiation, he agreed to take Charles back to Saigon with him to work at the family business. By now, my father was a very, very wealthy man. So it was agreed that the dad would return to Vietnam and then send a ticket for Charles to go and join him in Vietnam. So all Charles needed to do was wait for his ticket to arrive. Instead, he stole his stepfather's money and used it to buy a gun. He then robbed a pregnant woman at gunpoint and landed in jail. His French passport was revoked because he wasn't even a French citizen. And then his ticket arrived while he was incarcerated. Well, he wept and begged for forgiveness, swore he would change. Since it was his first arrest, the victim forgave him. He was released, and soon he went off to Vietnam on a refugee passport. His Indian half-sisters welcomed him, and he got a big bedroom at home, the use of his father's car, and he was earning quite a bit of money. Guess how long it took him? 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and then he was bored. Started stealing things from his father and selling them, gambling, chasing girls, crashed his father's car. He became a living nightmare. So after he'd stayed in Vietnam for about 6 months, his father shipped him off to India so that he could live in the country for 1 year and qualify for a passport because he still didn't have a nationality or passport. But Charles decided that he hated Indians and he looked down on them, even though he was half Indian. He ran back to Saigon twice. His father beat the crap out of him and shipped him back to India. Everybody everywhere was just tired of him. And now suddenly he wanted to be in Paris. Didn't seem so bad after all. And so he snuck onto a ship and returned to France. He was 18 years old by now, and he couldn't get a job. So he spent the next 5 years committing crimes, getting imprisoned. And to his credit, he used his prison time very, very well. He devoured books on law, psychology, philosophy, criminology. He learned German, English. He studied Licence characterology, and he knew this subject matter backwards and inside out. So Charles was facing deportation from France once he completed his current prison term. His friends had cut him off, and he had no one to turn to. And then around this time, a volunteer mentor got assigned to him, a retired Frenchman named Félix Descanges. Felix visited Charles every week at prison, got him books, chocolates, clothes, and got him reconciled with both his parents, got him a French passport again. Felix arranged a job, an apartment, a car for Charles when he got out of prison and was able to intervene to prevent his deportation when he got released from prison. Thanks to Felix, his father even offered Charles a position as a branch manager in Saigon if he wanted to return. The world was his oyster. He had multiple options for a life reset if he would only take one. And at last the day came when Charles was released from prison. And Felix was so proud. He hosted a lavish dinner party for Charles and invited his friends. Turns out Felix was an upper class fella, very, very wealthy. And he was impressed by the way Charles was able to hold his own in that crowd. Present at that dinner was a very pretty French girl named Chantal. She was 20 years old, came from old money, was cultured beyond belief, and was studying at Sorbonne University. Charles stared at her all night. He borrowed money from Felix, and then he accidentally bumped into Chantal on campus at Sorbonne, and I loved bombing her immediately, and it worked. Much to her parents' horror, Chantal fell completely under Charles's spell, and they got engaged within months. He obviously couldn't afford to provide for her in the manner she was accustomed to, so he went gambling regularly to try and get money. One night she accompanied him. He was on a winning streak. Within 3 hours, he had the equivalent of 250,000 francs. And she told him to cash in the chips, but he was too greedy. And then on the next round, he lost the money so badly that he owed the casino money. And so what did he do? He made Chantal remove the vintage diamond necklace her grandmother had given her, which she was wearing, and they used to pay his debt at the casino. He then drove her home in a stolen car, and on the way got into an accident where uh, she bashed her head against the windscreen and needed stitches. And he was sent straight back to jail. He had been cheating on her throughout, but Chantal was already hooked on him. She believed that her love would change him. So Felix finally warned Chantal that Charles had zero empathy. He wasn't capable of remorse. He was considered a psychopath at the prison and that she should move on, but she refused to. And then she told Charles what Felix had said. And so the friendship between the two men suffered as a result. So eventually, Charles and Chantal wed 6 months after his release from prison. The wedding was like a funeral because her parents were devastated and she was soon pregnant. And Charles decided that Asia would be a better place to start their family, but he needed money to move them there because he didn't have any. And so what did he do? He robbed his sister Anne Marie, who was now doing very well. She owned a big restaurant in Paris. He stole 6,000 francs from her. He then cashed multiple fraudulent checks at the banks the same day, and he knew he was looking at a very long jail sentence once he got caught. And so he gave Chantal 6 hours notice to pack her bag so they could flee from France to Saigon. So she would have to abandon her job, her parents, her whole life, and go on the road with him. She didn't even get to say goodbye to her family. They just fled, and he stole Felix's car. So they went first to Geneva, and then they drove overland through the hippie trail to Asia. So the police couldn't track them. They were both fugitives now, and the police were looking for them in France. And if they set foot in Vietnam, they're going to get extradited, so they couldn't get to Vietnam. And so they arrived in India 3 months later. Using his upper-class French wife, he was able to infiltrate the wealthy European circles in India, and they often attended parties in the swanky Malabar Hills, one of the best parts of India, of the capital. Chantal gave birth to a daughter named Madhu. That's their daughter Madhu. And this is her as a grown-up now. She has nothing to do with her father. So they lived in a modest apartment in Mumbai. He began to hustle and swindle people, going on business trips. He uh, used his wife to meet all these people, and then he found ways to get money from them in what his wife called pranks. That's the way she minimized her husband's crimes. He had affairs and had multiple babies with other women, but instead she blamed and attacked the other women instead of blaming her husband. Charles did a lot of smuggling and worked on the black market and underworld in Hong Kong, Bangkok, and Beirut. He perfected his use of disguises and accents, and with his racial mix, he could pass for Filipino, Latino, Italian, or English. And he just moved from one to the other. He knew how to even disguise himself as a woman. He always carried wigs, beards, and mustaches with him. And this master of disguise helped a lot because he was stealing people's passports and impersonating them for his smuggling business. So during these jaunts, he observed the high number of young, long-haired middle-class pot-smoking Westerners who were backpacking through Asia, and he despised them, especially for the easy lives they had, which they left. They left their cozy lives and were here wearing secondhand clothes and bragging about all the drugs they were taking. And much as he hated and envied them, he saw them as an untapped market for himself. Some of them were as young as 15, very naive and gullible. And Charles was so charismatic and charming and intelligent, he drew them to him in droves. He stole their passports and other valuables. After all, they were rich and overinsured. And if he got into trouble, he could just bribe local officials and get away, Some of them even saw him as a kind of a Robin Hood figure. Now, remember, Charles had spent years in prison studying psychology and Lassen's characterology. So he would use his knowledge of these to study his victims and his accomplices first, figure out their personality types, plan out his crimes and roles they would play, and then execute them perfectly. It was so easy for him. It was like playing chess. Because for him, people were so predictable now. In India, Charles had built a good reputation with the playboys from wealthy families who wanted to drive the latest Maseratis, Alfa Romeos, and BMWs, and all the best that the jet set in Europe were driving. He always delivered affordably. At the time, there was only one car factory in the whole of India, and it could only produce 50 cars a day. So Charles would fly to Europe, steal all these fast cars, and then drive them back to India. And if he stole more than one car, he would pay all these hippies $200 a pop to drive several of the other cars back to India for him. And they just adored him. It was so thrilling to be around him. He was generous. He taught them how to do three-point turns at 100 kilometers an hour. He was the life of the party. He knew shortcuts and he knew how to get them anything they needed. And so he would say, quote, these Indians, I could sell them the wind and they would buy it. And it's true, he was that kind of person. His personal friends were top-ranking businessmen, Bollywood stars, and directors and the upper class, French expats. He entertained millionaires in the bars at the Taj Mahal. Life was good. He was only 27 years old at this time and he was rich. So he took his wife on a luxury holiday and blew 500,000 francs on jewelry for her. He even sent Felix a thank you letter crediting him for changing his life. On that trip, they went to a casino in Hong Kong, and again he won 250,000. But by morning, once again, he'd lost all the money and he owed the casino money. And so he actually left his wife at the hotel in Hong Kong as collateral whilst returning to India to borrow money and pay off his debt. His greed and stupidity were limitless. Sometimes his wife would not see him for days, and then she would see a newspaper headline about how he'd gotten arrested. In Indian jails, the guards loved him because he always gave them fancy cigarettes, joked with them, and taught them how to play games. He would invite his wife over and use her to entice the guards and distract them. And then, using that, he would escape from prison. And she loved being married to a celebrity gangster. She enjoyed it. On a few occasions, Charles had escaped from prison by drugging the guards. Sometimes he had learned um, something he had learned from the hippies. So these hippies always had all kinds of drugs on them, like quaaludes, uppers, mogadons, speed, librium, Lardoctil, and all kinds of downers as well. And you could get these drugs without a prescription at the time. And these were hardcore drugs that could get you unconscious. And so Charles tested these drugs on dozens of people in dozens of ways, in coffee, milk, in whiskey, and tea. He knew exactly what dosage to use to get the effect he wanted. All he had to do was slip a drug into the tea and offer it to the prison guards, and then it was so easy for him to escape prison. And then once he escaped, he would buy used clothes from someone passing by and pay them US dollars. And then he just blend in with the Western hippies and cross the border into a new country. That's why he was called the Serpent. And this is the way he escaped from prison in uh, Afghanistan and multiple other countries. So one time he and his wife got incarcerated in Afghanistan and he escaped prison, but he left her behind in the prison in Afghanistan. And their daughter was sent back to Paris to live with her grandparents. Charles stole a passport and snuck into France and kidnapped her and brought her back to Asia. His ability to slip in and out of countries and slither out of prisons was just legendary. If you read the book, it's almost like a James Bond spy story. Charles Sobhraj was a one-man international criminal ring. He was a shadow, a ghost. Anyway, Charles was arrested in Iran by the Savak. These men were the Shah of Iran's secret police. They were like the SS. These were men you played with, and you hardly ever got out alive. And so he was imprisoned by these people for 1 year, and he was wanted by the police in 8 other countries at this time. But somehow he made a deal with these guys, the Savak, and they didn't extradite him to any of the countries where he was wanted. Instead, they helped him cross into Turkey. I guess they saw kindred spirit in a fellow psychopath like them. So up to this point, Charles hadn't committed murder yet, as far as we know. He'd accidentally killed a man with the wrong dosage of drugs. And when this happened, he just shrugged and threw the body in a river. He didn't care. All the people who could have stopped him up to this point enabled him. And so now he believed that he was invincible. Chantal had finally had enough. And so when she got out of the Afghan jail, she moved on with her life. She met an American guy and married him. And when Charles found out that his wife had moved on from him, he was deeply, deeply wounded. And this hardened him. So Charles's first victims in Turkey, in Istanbul, were an American couple, a businessman and his wife. So Charles had checked into an expensive hotel in Istanbul that was frequented by foreigners, and he blended in, eavesdropped on their conversations, because remember, he spoke multiple languages. And so when he listened to these people, he was able to select who would fit his aims best. And then he approached the couple, pretending to be in the same line of business as the husband. And then they had drinks together and started to talk. And whilst they were talking, he slipped strychnine powder into the man's drink, which caused the man to have explosive diarrhea. And then, of course, he had the exact drugs needed to save the man from his diarrhea. So he offered the fella vitamins to stop the diarrhea, and these vitamins made the man groggy. And so they helped the businessman to his hotel room where he passed out, and then Charles was able to easily subdue the wife and inject her with a substance that knocked her unconscious. So with both of them unconscious, he cleaned them out, cleaned out all their jewelry and valuables, locked their door, and put a do not disturb sign on the door. He then checked out of the hotel using their ID card, using the husband's ID card, and cleaned out their safe of over 30,000 US dollars at the time. Also diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires. And he then fled the country. I mean, if he could do this to a businessman, what do you think those poor hippies were like to him? Piece of cake. So he would go on to use this method to kill 30 people. Now, on a flight to India on May 5th, 1975, Charles met a French-Canadian woman from Quebec. Her name was Marie-Andrée Leclerc. She was a Canadian nurse. She was on holiday with her boyfriend, and she reminded him of his ex-wife, Chantal. Marie-Andrée was smitten with Charles, or Alain, as he now called himself. Fell in love at first sight, and she pursued him. He didn't mind because Western women were very useful in Asia, and he could use her to lower the guards of his future victims, her fellow Westerners. And so he drugged her boyfriend, and then they hooked up. That's how they got together. She knew that he had drugged her boyfriend. That's how sick their relationship was right from the start. And so the three of them went traveling around Asia for about a month on Charles's expense. He then took them to the airport for their flight back to Montreal. And as they were leaving, he asked Marie Andre to come back to him and live with him in Asia as his queen. And so she left and came back shortly afterwards. And then shortly after she joined him in Asia, this news story broke.
Story that will span 28 years begins in the lazy resort town of Pattaya, Thailand in the mid-1970s. One morning, a fisherman in a longboat finds the body of a woman floating in the water. He alerts the Royal Thai police, who rush to the scene. The coroner examines the young victim and questions the fisherman. With no identification and no signs of foul play, the woman is most likely a Westerner who's had a swimming accident. The coroner fingerprints and examines the victim, but still can't identify her. A toxicology test reveals alcohol and hashish in her system. The medical examiner has seen several cases like this in her career. An unsuspecting tourist falling prey to the waters off Pattaya. What she doesn't yet realize is that there's a killer on the loose. The police canvass area hotels to see if anyone has reported a foreigner missing. But foreign tourists come and go all the time, without notice. No one reports her missing. It's as if she never even existed. And after 2 months, another discovery grabs the attention of the Royal Thai Police. A worker driving his truck near the very same beach notices something unusual in the brush. He finds the body of a second young Western woman, murdered. Police comb the area, but find few clues. She's a young woman, perhaps a student on an overseas vacation. But she has no identification. No purse, no wallet, no passport. Police don't connect her to the earlier victim.
In the beginning, there was no alarm raised over this.
Covering the two deaths, reporter Alan Dawson.
People didn't really correlate for a while the appearance of one body and then another.
But one person paying attention is Sampol Sutamai, a lieutenant colonel in the Thai Police Department and also the head of Interpol in Thailand. The similarities of the cases don't catch his eye. The differences do.
They were both found near the ocean, but the conditions of the bodies were different. The police report stated that the second woman was murdered, deliberately drowned.
This discovery raises doubts about the first young woman. Perhaps her death was no accident either. A sinister pattern of anonymous female victims could be developing.
So over the years, Charles had had multiple accomplices. For some reason, once Marie-Andre joined him, murder became a part of his MO. So the first known victim was Teresa Knowlton, a bright 18-year-old American girl who was just passing through Pattaya on her way to a monastery in Kathmandu. Her body was found in the sea. And then next was this guy, Vitaly Hakim, a Turkish fella whose burnt, beaten, stabbed, and decapitated body was found in a field by the roadside. And then days later, Vitaly's French girlfriend, Charmaine Carew, who had gone looking for him in Pattaya, was found. She's the third one we found. We had a child together. Her body was similarly found in the sea in a bikini. Well, it was clear that she'd been killed. Her neck was broken. Nobody knew who they were. And with so many Western hippies coming through, it was challenging. And so the media called him the bikini killer. Because the first victim, known because the women were found in bikinis. Then the very next day, 2 more bodies were found. The Western couple that had been brutally beaten, stabbed, and set on fire while they were still alive. And their faces were totally burnt. But the woman's clothes had a tag that read, "Made in Holland." So 5 bodies within a matter of months in Pattaya, Thailand. And nobody knew who they were. The victims were all very young, ranging from age 18 to 25 years old. And it didn't even occur to the authorities that the murders were related, because Pattaya was just considered such a safe spot for Westerners, such a fun spot. That's how it looked in the 70s. So a few weeks later in Kathmandu, 2 bodies were found again.
Striking almost 1,400 miles away, at the end of the trail, in Kathmandu, Nepal. Both Nepal and Thailand recently joined Interpol. But the rudimentary communication between the countries fails to alert Nepalese officials that a killer is on the loose. Then, police discover 2 bodies outside Kathmandu. A pair of Nepalese boys stumble upon the grisly scene. An unforgettable sight for both the children and the investigators.
The woman had a wound on her chest, and the man had a wound on his neck. They were so damaged, it was difficult to see much more.
Kathmandu detective Bishwa Lal Shristha investigates both murders.
When we saw the dead bodies, the faces were burned. They were naked. We had no idea who could have done this.
Securing the crime scene, the police turn the boys back.
Nepal had quite an insular culture, had only been open to tourists for 2 decades when this happened. So this was inconceivable and traumatizing. And no one could identify these 4 burnt victims yet. So meanwhile, Marie-Andre was still adjusting to her new life. Charles had love bombed her with multiple calls and postcards while she was back in Canada. But now that she'd returned, she discovered that he'd been juggling a multitude of girlfriends. He had 1 steady girlfriend in each area code where he operated. And these women were his spies, his translators, and they hid him or stolen goods whenever necessary. And they were related to top-ranking police officials. clever man. So he introduced Marie-Andre as his secretary, and he changed her name to Monique. So imagine being in the honeymoon stage of your relationship and needing to compete with other women already. Charles said he did this on purpose. He wanted to break her because she was a stubborn, pig-headed Quebecoise. And I suspect that the level of cruelty and violence that is present in Charles around this time had to do with the fact that his wife had just dumped him, and he was taking it out on Marie-Andre because she was, I guess, a representation of his ex-wife now. So he even stopped being intimate with Monique. She had to earn it. Imagine that. So before leaving Kathmandu, Charles and Marie-Andre, or Monique as she calls herself now, were picked up by the police as suspects in the murder. But they escaped by using stolen Dutch passports that they'd already altered. They then fled to Bangkok, where they rented a 2-bedroom place in this building known as Kanak House. It was the business headquarters located in the business district of Bangkok and near all the big hotels. Location, 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 right? So Marie, aka Monique, was very useful in luring fellow Westerners to their apartment to get drugged and robbed. So that was their MO, befriend, drug, and rob. Charles would also bring his Thai girlfriends to their flat to infuriate Marie. Actually, it was the Thai girl who had chosen this apartment for them. They lived on the 5th floor. So Marie-Andre wrote in her diary that she felt, quote, frustrated, nervous, aggressive, and unwanted. So Charles used a gem business as his cover business, and he went by the name Alain instead of Charles. Now, there was a 25-year-old French guy named Dominique Renelot living in Bangkok around this time. He had traveled through Asia for 2 years, and he was getting ready to return to France. And he had been visiting the Doi Suthep Temple in Thailand when Charles and Marie approached him and spoke French to him. So he was very happy, right, to hear his mother tongue so far from home. And they became instant friends. They invited him to join them for dinner, which they paid for. They then invited him to go out to a spicy dance club that night. And as they were leaving the restaurant, Dominic got dizzy and he could barely walk. So this very nice couple kindly led Dominic back to his hotel room where he passed out. And they spent the night with him. And he woke up the next day with explosive diarrhea and stomach pain. And his new friend, Alain, told him that he had dysentery and that if he wanted to survive, he was going to have to move into their apartment at Kanak House so they could take care of him. And Charles told him that you have to, quote, give yourself completely over to me. And strange as it all seemed, Dominic was so sick that he agreed to it. For the first 2 weeks, he kept drifting in and out of consciousness. They stored his passport and money for him, and they kept giving him medicine twice a day. He lost so much weight and he felt like a hollow shell. The medicine was making him sicker, but they refused to let him see a doctor. He eventually got better and was ready to return to France, and so he asked Alain to return his passport and money. And what do you know? The next day he was magically sick again, diarrhea, and so drowsy all the time again. And then suddenly this strange Indian guy named Ajay showed up and joined the trio at the apartment. And Dominique couldn't believe the number of hippies that were always present at the apartment all the time. Parties almost each night. And Monique was just a glorified maid. that Charles used to impress his Western guests. He didn't give a damn about her, and it was so obvious to everyone, even to her, that he was just using her. Dominique noticed that Charles would invite some guests to go swimming at Pattaya Beach, and how rehearsed the invitation sounded every time Charles said it. There was a French couple living in the same apartment building as Alain and Monique. They were Nadine Gers and her husband, a chef named Remy. Very smart and observant couple. They knew that Alain and Monique were not really a couple. They noticed the ridiculous number of tourists that came to the apartment and got sick and vanished all the time. And they noticed how gaunt Dominique, the French fella, was getting. And since both women were French, Nadine decided to befriend Monique. So she visited the apartment every day. And Alain encouraged their relationship because he was going to use Nadine. Nadine knew loads of people who worked at airlines and the various embassies. Plus, her husband was a world-class chef. So not only would Charles, aka Alain, use her to lure these high-quality Westerners to exploit, he could use her husband to make them fancy meals. So Monique and Charles and Alain had two pets living in their apartment, a white puppy and also a little monkey named Coco. One morning, Nadine got to the apartment and found a furious Monique scolding Dominique, and she asked what happened. And then she was told that the pet monkey Coco had died after drinking Dominique's medicine. And that was when Dominique and Nadine started suspecting that, there may be more to this medication that he was being given. Because it was strange that he wasn't getting better after 2 months. But they were so nice. They were so nice. No, no, no. They couldn't be doing that to him. They couldn't be punishing him. They couldn't be poisoning him. Dominic wanted to get out of there, but he had no money. He had no passport. And he was paralyzed with fear. He was a prisoner, always trapped by his jailers who never left his side. Alain rented the apartment next door as well and began hosting his hippies there all the time. So now, there were these two Frenchmen named Yannick and Francois who came to stay. They had been policemen in France, and within days of moving in to the next door apartment, someone broke into their apartment and stole their passport and all their money. And then they soon got very sick, both of them, very, very sick, just like Dominique and dozens of other guests had gotten. So Nadine had started working for Alain and introducing him to her contacts because he was a gem dealer selling them precious stones, and she received a commission for each transaction. She helped distribute his business card widely in her social circle, Alain Gauthier. One night, when they got him back to his apartment from a conference they attended together, Alain opened his suitcase, and Nadine was standing nearby, and she was very surprised to see the number of fake beards, mustaches, and wigs he had in his suitcase. And alarm bells began ringing for her, but she only told her husband about it. And Dominique, meanwhile, started noticing a pattern. Whenever Alain brought a new person to stay at the apartment, he would kick Dominique out of the apartment for a few days. And then when Dominique returned to the apartment, the new person would be gone, but all their property would still be there at the apartment. And these are things a person wouldn't leave behind. Like a woman would come around and then she'd leave her handbag and just vanish. And then sometimes Dominic would hear people getting beaten up in a locked bedroom, but Charles and Marie, aka Alain and Monique, would explain it away as something else. Some of the Westerners started working for Alain by now, helping him smuggle precious stones to other countries, and money was overflowing. But everybody was terrified of Alain and they felt watched all the time. And this Indian fella, Ajay, he was always lurking in the shadows with a 9-inch knife and reporting everything back to Alan. So it was widely known in the apartment building that Alan was stealing passports, but he was so feared and connected with the police in Thailand that nobody dared to take this concern to the police because many of the police officers were on his payroll. So Dominique managed to get his passport back from Alan, and then he was surprised by the state of it because it was in tatters. Alan had used his passport multiple times and changed the picture in it. So it would be impossible for Dominique to use it in the way it was. He didn't know what to do, and he wanted to get away. So Alan, Monique, and Ajay were going to Hong Kong for a 1-week trip, and they would help fix up Dominique's passport when they returned, they said. So remember those two police officers, the French ones? One of them, Yannick, he drove the trio to the airport and deposited them there. And then he got back to the apartment, and the next thing, Yannick burst into the apartment and he was hysterical. He was saying to Dominique, Dominique, you need to leave now. And he was frantically showing Dominique the front page of a newspaper with some burnt bodies that had been discovered. And they recognized the clothes on the bodies as one of the couples that had been present at Alain's apartment for a party and had just recently left. Dominique didn't want to believe it. They also showed the picture to Nadine and Remy, the chef. And these people were all in a state of panic and disbelief. Like they've been okay with the druggings and the robberies and everything, right? Scams and whatnot. But murder, just a whole other level. So the four of them searched Alain and Marie's bedroom. They found hypodermic needles, handcuffs, petrol, bloody metal pipes, muddy trousers, and the personal items of multiple Westerners who had just suddenly vanished while staying at the apartment. And there were 50 different international passports in Alain's safe. It was all very incriminating. But what were they going to do? Because they knew they couldn't go to the police and they couldn't go to the French embassy because thanks to Nadine's connections, Alain was deeply ensconced with the diplomats there. She felt so disgusted at herself and so guilty for providing Alain with so many victims and accomplices. So Alain, Monique, and Ajay would soon be getting back from Hong Kong. Dominique and Yannick wanted to be gone. They literally wanted to have fled to Paris by the time these people returned, but they had no money and they felt trapped. Yannick didn't even have a passport. Nadine's husband lent them money for their tickets, and Yannick forced the French embassy to issue him a refugee passport on the spot. And so all three men went to the airport that day to wait for their flights, and they were in a state of pure terror for hours, afraid that Alain would suddenly appear. That's how frightened they were of him, even though he put on this nice guy persona. And they were right to be afraid because he had decided to return to Thailand a day early, and he'd actually been at the airport at the same time as them. But they were lucky that they were all able to escape without bumping into him at the airport. So Alain, Marie-Andre or Monique, and Ajay arrived back at the apartment a day early, only to realize that the apartment was empty and all their prisoners had escaped back to France. They phoned Nadine and her husband, who pretended not to know anything about it. And Nadine and her husband were so frightened that they pushed a huge cabinet against their apartment door whenever they were at home. So now there were 5 people who knew that Alain or Charles Sobhraj was a murderer. What were they going to do to stop him? It was February 1976 by now, at the Royal Netherlands Embassy. A Dutch diplomat was going through the diplomatic pouch, which contains securely sent documents sent from the home country. It had just arrived from The Hague. And this diplomat, a man named Herman Knippenberg, had been instructed to trace the whereabouts of two young Dutch travelers. Their names were Henk Pitania and Kokkie Henke. They were a couple. Their families were very worried because they had suddenly stopped sending letters home. At first, Knippenberg just assumed that they were probably on marijuana or LSD somewhere in a cave in Thailand. Because the past year alone, there had been over 30,000 Dutch tourists visiting Thailand, and that's just Dutch tourists. Most of them long-haired hippies. And this sort of thing happened all the time. The letter from their families bothered Knippenberg for some reason. They were meant to have renewed their passports whilst in Thailand, but the embassy hadn't heard from them. They had also informed their families that they would be meeting a shady gem dealer to buy precious stones from him. This was Knippenberg's first ever overseas posting. He was only 28 years old and had only ever worked on assisting Dutch nationals who had lost their passports or who wanted to adopt children from Thailand. He didn't even have a picture of the Dutch couple, so where was he going to begin looking for them? Now, Nadine and the French guys had been trying to get help desperately. Dominique had contacted the Foreign Office in France when he arrived there, but nothing was done because, he went to the Foreign Office and they're like, well, Thailand is so far away, we don't care about that. And the French embassy in Thailand was in Sobhraj's pocket, so it was totally useless going into that. And so Nadine contacted the British embassy, but they wanted proof. And so Nadine snuck into Alain's apartment when they had traveled, and she took a diary that was written in Dutch and handed it over to the British embassy. That diary belonged to someone named Henk Britannia. The British embassy had made a report to the Thai police, and then nothing. They never followed up or anything. Nadine no longer felt safe. She avoided being on her own at home as much as possible. She only stayed home when her husband was home as well. And Alain and Monique noticed this, and they also began to avoid their own apartment after their prisoners escaped. But they didn't know for sure what Nadine had discovered, so they were stalking her. So she'd be out somewhere and they would suddenly appear offering her a ride home or, just have a friendly chat with her wherever she went. It was very, very creepy. So Knippenberg was at his desk one afternoon when he received a call from an attaché at the Belgian embassy. And the caller asked him if there were any missing Dutch nationals. This was the attaché, a man named Paul. Knippenberg was surprised and asked why. And Paul, the Belgian attaché, told him that there was a rumor spreading within the diplomatic community in Thailand about a man named Alain who was luring tourists to his place in Bangkok, killing them and stealing their passports. Nah, that sounded ridiculous, said Knippenberg. And Knippenberg almost dismissed it. And then he remembered that he had read the paper a few months prior about the couple that had been found burnt alive, remember? And that the girl had been wearing a bra that had a made in Holland tag on it. And, this was an intimate item, a bra. So that made him think, oh, maybe this is a Dutch couple. The Thai authorities had said that the dead couple they'd found were Australian. So he didn't want to pursue it further, but he went on anyway. Knippenberg contacted the Australian embassy and asked them if they had any dead, couple in Thailand or missing. And they said nope, they didn't have any missing all season in Thailand, and certainly no dead ones. Knippenberg then informed the Belgian attaché that he was going to follow up with the Thai authorities. And the attaché warned him that Alain Gauthier had a Thai girlfriend whose father and brothers were high-ranking Thai police officials, so to be careful. Knippenberg had already developed his own police contacts, and so he went ahead. He wanted to see those burnt bodies of the unidentified tourists that were in the police morgue. And so he arranged for the dental records and pictures of the Dutch couple, Henk and Kokkie, to be sent to him. And he then got a Dutch dentist to come with him. His contacts in the police had been trained by Scotland Yard, and so they held themselves to a higher standard than the other ones who were, easily bought with bribes. So anyway, the Belgian attaché, Paul personally knew Nadine, and he'd compiled a detailed report about Alain Gauthier and his criminal enterprise and witness statements and all that. And also the story about the Dutch diary and the Dutch passports. The Thai police didn't know about this, only the embassies knew about all these things. The various Western embassies had all made their own dossiers about Alain Gauthier. Knippenberg visited the Australian embassy, where the consul told him about 2 Australian victims whom Alain had drugged and robbed, but not killed previously. But then he'd used a different alias with them at the time. So Knippenberg requested records from the Thai immigration department. And yes, the records showed that a Dutch couple named Kokkie and Henk had arrived in Thailand, but they never left Thailand, which means they were still in Thailand or their bodies were still in Thailand. And so a few weeks later, when the pictures and the dental records arrived, he went to the morgue with that dentist, and she manually examined the dead bodies of and examined the couple's teeth and positively identified them as the missing Dutch couple. So Knippenberg informed his police contacts and told them about Alain Gauthier. He also used a psychological trick to try and, make them give their best work, telling them that his ambassador was sure that their reputations would be enhanced globally if they did things properly and were able to get this killer and bring him to justice. So officially, this was where Knippenberg's role was supposed to end as a diplomat, because he was only a guest in the country. But he was too invested to let Thai police bungle this investigation. So he contacted the Belgian attaché and asked to meet Nadine and all the other contacts who knew about Alain Gauthier's activities. And so they went out one night on a stakeout outside the apartment building and sent someone upstairs to invite Nadine outside to meet them. And so Nadine and her husband joined Knippenberg, and they went somewhere private to talk. And Nadine told Knippenberg everything that she knew, including about the Dutch diary that she'd given to the British embassy. And after speaking with Nadine all night, Knippenberg stormed over to the British embassy. He exploded on them. Because for reasons that no one knows, they just sat on the evidence and did nothing with it. Apart from that little, report they'd sent to the Thai police. They could have given it to the Netherlands embassy months earlier, but they didn't. He was so disgusted with them. So he retrieved the diary and the report that the Brits had written. He translated the diary, and Nadine took pictures of Charles or Alain secretly for Knippenberg. They gathered up all this evidence and spoon-fed it to the Thai police, and yet the police were still reluctant to make any arrest. Meanwhile, Alain Monique and Ajay had grown very suspicious of Nadine at this time. Knippenberg was still trying to convince the police to raid the house, the apartment at the Canuck building. And it was just in the nick of time to save Nadine, because now that they'd grown suspicious of her, they were trying to target her. I'm now going to share a clip from the Netflix series about this story, The Serpent. You can watch it on Netflix.
Knippenberg, I got your message. What the hell's going on?
Jan Tassin has agreed to send police into Canning House, but under the pretext of a narcotics raid, so Gautier won't suspect Nadine.
Look, you did it.
Yes, Paul, but listen, we were on the phone to her, and I believe Gautier overheard.
But you said the cops are going in.
In 2 hours. I'm trying to get through to Jan Tassin to get him to move right away.
Christ.
We didn't think she'd get trapped there. Paul, listen, I need you to go there right away.
All right.
Just until the police arrive.
All right, my friend. Well, finally, we do it my way.
Paul, as soon as I've squared things with Jan Tassin, I'll be right behind you.
I found her in here yesterday snooping around. Then she and Remy left as soon as it got dark, and then she comes back this morning alone. You know how close she and Dominique were.
I know, Ajay. I see these things.
Mais tu sais, j'en ai assez de l'Asie maintenant. Aller en rapatrier, ça se faire en Europe. On s'en va s'installer là-bas.
Mais vous venez juste d'arriver, Vous partez quand?
Oh, pas tout de suite. Dans quelques mois. Mais c'est là-bas que j'ai envie de rester maintenant. Il va me présenter à sa mère.
Où, en Europe? En France?
My ties! This one's for you.
Thank you. But it's a bit early for me, en fait.
Very good, Nadine. And Ajay went to the trouble.
Yes, Nadine. I went to the trouble. Drink.
You should try. It's your friends.
Don't worry, she was okay. So the apartment got raided, but surprise, surprise, that safe where they found the 50 passports was empty. Alan presented an American passport and told them his name was David Allen Gore. And he was so convincing that he fooled an American embassy attaché. And Marie-Andre simply showed a Canadian passport with her real name. But oh, I don't know anyone named Monique. My name is Marie-Andre. And Ajay used the passport of this fella whom they killed. Remember the Turkish fella? Vitaly Hakim used his passport. And they said they all worked for this man named Alain Gautier. They were interrogated that night and allowed to return home on the condition that they return to the police station in the morning to continue with the interrogation. They fled the country that night. Nadine went to the French embassy for help. The officials told her that if she didn't feel safe in Thailand, she should return home to France. Like they couldn't care less about her. Knippenberg was so disappointed, and so were Nadine and her husband Remy. Nadine then received a postcard from Switzerland from Alain, which read, "My dear Nadine, I didn't forget you. I hope to see you soon and show you my gratitude." End quote. That was a threat. She was terrified. So together with Knippenberg, she searched their apartment that they'd abandoned they found 51 different kinds of drugs that could cause hallucinations, nausea, diarrhea, and unconsciousness. 51 different kinds. Also, the property of several of the murder victims. Also, Marie-Andre had forgotten her diary, and it showed how miserable, insecure, and desperate she felt being with Alain. The news about their activities had broken, and the news about all the murders, but it painted the victims as drug smugglers, thanks to Alain, because he'd smeared their reputations. But the good thing is that the pictures of Sobhraj and Marie-Andre were now widely circulated all over Asia. But they were blissfully unaware because they fled to Paris. So Marie-Andre thought it was a romantic trip, but actually Charles had gone to Paris because he knew his ex-wife, Chantal, was visiting along with his daughter, Madhu. And so he saw them briefly while he was in Paris. Knippenberg got in trouble at work and with his wife for all the work he'd done on Sobhraj, but he didn't stop, he just kept doing it. So, meanwhile, Knippenberg had submitted his detailed dossier about Charles Sobhraj, aka Alain Gauthier, to Interpol and to multiple foreign embassies. Remember, he only knew this man as Alain Gauthier. He didn't know that the man's name was actually Sobhraj. So now that it had been distributed to the multiple foreign embassies, the Canadian ambassador in Thailand got a hold of the file too, and he then transferred the file to Canada, and soon the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, showed up at the home of Marie-Andre's parents in Quebec. And it was how the authorities were able to crack the code. Because, like I said, everybody knew him as Alain Gauthier. But when the Canadian authorities got the contact of his mother, his mom, who still lived in Paris, from Marie-Andre's parents, they found out that she was Madame Sobhraj. His mother's name was Madame Sobhraj. And that's how they realized, oh, they were dealing with this lifelong criminal named Charles Sobhraj. And now Interpol was on red alert. He was wanted in 28 countries and was known as an escape artist. So everybody was on alert because this is a man who could vomit blood at will. He could fake any illness he wanted convincingly. This is a man who had faked appendicitis and so convincingly that he had the surgery. And then whilst recovering from that surgery, he escaped from prison. This is a man who had tricked his own stepbrother into switching identities with him and serving 18 years in prison, in a Greek prison, on his behalf. 18 years. So Interpol issued an international arrest warrant for Sobhraj, Marie-Andre, and Ajay. And suddenly the French embassy in Thailand was very interested in what Nadine had to say. The bodies of the various tourists were identified and shipped home to their families. And for the first time in his life, Charles Sobhraj began to doubt his invincibility. So he ran away to India with Marie-Andre. By now, she was a shell of herself, and she had aged so much from the stress because now there was an international arrest warrant for her, so it was real now. All these countries were trying to arrest them, and she was falling apart. Charles beat her up almost on a daily basis. Her body was covered in bruises and bites. Charles blew 200,000 US dollars gambling. This was the 70s, remember? That's how reckless he was. And now they were back in India and they were broke. And Their accomplice Ajay had vanished sometime in 1976. And it's believed that Charles killed him because he's never been seen or heard from since then. So Charles was building a new gang in India because Marie-Andre wasn't being very helpful. She was a wreck. Meanwhile, Marie-Andre was plotting her escape from Charles, putting money aside, and secretly calling her family in Canada every day. So now, around this time, a huge tour group arrived in the city in Mumbai. So there were 60 French students. That's 60 French passports. So Charles approached them and befriended the entire group over a number of days, trying to gain their trust before he would strike and drug them and rob them. Modus operandi. Now, at the Delhi police station, several police officers were excited after reading about Sobhraj because the whole world's attention was on this criminal and capturing him. So imagine what arresting this man that was wanted all over the world would do for one's career. This slippery serpent that had escaped prison in different countries 13 times. And they knew from Interpol that he was in India and that it was only a matter of time before they would get him. And that's exactly what happened.
India, here at the Vikram Hotel, when a group of French students begin passing out after taking anti-dysentery pills given to them by their tour guide. Police arrest the tour guide along with 3 female accomplices. 2 women quickly confess and make some startling revelations. They tell police the tour guide is a con artist, thief, and murderer named Charles Sobhraj. They confess to helping Sobhraj drug and poison people on the hippie trail so they could steal their money and passports. Some poisonings, they say, ended in murder. Police investigating Sobhraj recover the passports and personal items of some of the murdered victims. As Indian investigators delve into Sobhraj's past, they discover he is suspected of crimes in several other countries.
There were a number of investigations in which he was involved. These ranged from thefts to international misuse of travel documents such as passports.
Based on this information, Indian authorities charged Sobhraj with the recent murder of a French tourist named Luc Solomon. While awaiting trial, officials allow Sobhraj to do a series of audio-taped interviews with Australian writer Richard Neville.
These photographs were taken during my interviews with Charles Sobhraj.
As Neville begins listening to Charles Sobhraj, he is stunned by what he hears. A full confession with all the grisly details.
It was the gradual unfolding of his confession to me that became more and more terrifying. The first person, Charles Sobhraj, admitted to me that he had actually murdered was Teresa Knowlton, who'd planned to study Tibetan Buddhism at a monastery.
In the audio tapes, Sobhraj tells Neville he met Teresa Knowlton at a resort near Pattaya Beach in southern Thailand. Sobhraj explains that at the time he was working a con, posing as a French gem dealer. He invited Teresa to join him and an accomplice at a club on the beach. There, they dropped a sedative called Magadon into her coffee.
She said, "Did you give me something? Because I feel very funny." I said to Teresa, "I'm sorry to say to you, but I think I have to do something better." Then she said, "You're going to beat me?" So I said, "No, I'm not going to beat you. Something better."
Sobhraj.
The Canadian Embassy and the Indian police called to inform Knippenberg that his man had been arrested. And look at this. Can you see Marie-Andre smiling? Clearly enjoying the attention. Journalists were falling all over themselves to get interviews with him. He was a celebrity. The lead detective, Narendra Tully, described how calm and unruffled Charles Sobhraj was when he was arrested. In 30 years on the job, he had never met a better actor than Sobhraj. The ease with which Sobhraj could summon anger, rage, tears, and every other emotion without really feeling it. No Hollywood actor could compare. For 10 days, he denied that he was Charles Sobhraj, was pretending to be an upper-class French citizen. He was asking to get in touch with him in touch with the French embassy. Even when his top accomplice, Marie-Andre, confessed and pointed him out, he still denied that he was Charles Sobhraj. And they almost let him go. That's how convincing a liar he was. Pathological liar. So on the 11th day, when the detective was going to let him go, he decided to use one last trick. He praised him. He praised Sobhraj for his brilliant escapes and crimes. And only when he flattered his ego by telling him, "Oh my God, you're one of the greatest criminals I've ever dealt with," that's when he finally admitted that, yes, I am Charles Sobhraj. So he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. But even behind bars, he ate the best food and was a mass manipulator. The guards and the inmates, they were all his slaves when he was in prison. They called him Sir Charles. Meanwhile, Thailand, Nepal, and other countries were patiently waiting to extradite him. In Thailand, he would get the death penalty if he got extradited there. Because now they found out, he committed most of his crimes in their jurisdiction. He wasn't going to let that happen. He wasn't going to let it happen.
To avoid extradition, Sobhraj comes up with a plan to extend his prison term in India. On March 16, 1986, Sobhraj puts that plan into motion by throwing himself a birthday party. Sobhraj and fellow inmates invite guards to the celebration. They serve cakes, cookies, and fruit, laced with sedatives. When the guards pass out, Sobhraj and his crew escape. He enjoys 22 days of freedom before he's recaptured by Indian police. Just as Sobhraj had calculated, he's sentenced to 10 additional years. The extension helps him avoid extradition to Thailand. That's because the statute of limitations for murder in Thailand will expire before he's released. As a result, he'll never face trial in Thailand. 11 years later, on February 17, 1997, 52-year-old Charles Sobhraj walks out of prison, a free man once again. Sobhraj returns to France. In Paris, he enjoys the life of a celebrity, as Asia's most notorious criminal. He hires an agent and grants interviews for a $5,000 fee. There's also money from book and movie deals. In one TV interview, he brags about how easy prison life was in India.
Full freedom inside the jail. I did whatever I wanted.
By now, his story about the murder of Teresa Knowlton in Thailand has changed, despite the taped confessions he made to author Richard Neville.
I have never killed her, nor did I met her. We have to see whether those tapes exist.
For 6 years, Charles Sobhraj lives the high life in France. Then, in 2003, he inexplicably returns to the scene of one of his most gruesome crimes, Nepal.
The one place in the world where there is still 2 crimes unaccounted for and no stay of executions in the law. In other words, he can still be prosecuted.
Sobhraj is arrested in Kathmandu after being spotted in a casino by a photojournalist.
The police, district police, they called me. I was happened to go and see where the right person is the right person or not.
27 years after he slipped away, the Nepalese police finally have Sobhraj in custody. Many wonder why he would return to a country where he could still be arrested.
I don't believe that Sobhraj thought that he would be caught. He probably felt like he could do this with impunity.
Sobhraj is accused of the grisly murders of two tourists, American Connie Jo Bronsich and Canadian Laurent Carrier. The charges in the Carrier case are dismissed for lack of evidence. In August 2004, the Kathmandu District Court finds Charles Sobhraj guilty of the Bronsich murder. He is sentenced to life in prison.
Well, that should have been the end of it. But Nepal decided to release this remorseless, ruthless murderer in 2022, and he returned to France. He's going to turn 82 in April. And he's married to a 30-year-old lady. Look at that. He just enjoys the attention. So he sold the book and film rights to his story for $15 million. Think about it, 15 million. A serial killer. See why I say we love criminals and we adore them? So Marie-Andre Leclerc served about 5 years in prison in India. And she was then diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And she returned to Canada in 1983, where she died on April 20th, 1984, in Quebec City. She also published a book before she died. So, do you know who didn't get any book deals? Herman Knippenberg. Do you know who has no biography or books written about him? And believe me, I looked. Herman Knippenberg. Not one biography, not one book about this fellow who helped solve it. Do you know who didn't receive $15 million for his story and is not a celebrity? Herman Knippenberg. He was finally honored by the Dutch King and the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2022. 46 years later is when they thanked him. 46 years. So, what does that tell you about our society? And shame on us. Look at how people fell all over themselves to give everything to the serial killer and nothing to the man who actually solved the case. So here's what he said on this occasion when he was honored by the Dutch king. I feel vindicated by the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs for my efforts to help stop this series of murders and to bring closure to the relatives of the missing victims. And finally, I have an answer to the questions that have come time after time for 46 years when people say, what were the reactions from the home front? Did you ever get a thank you? Finally, I can say yes. Shame on us. Meanwhile, Sobhraj has a statue of him at the hotel where he was arrested in India, in addition to everything else we've given him. So why does our society operate like this? Anyway, Knippenberg is now retired and he lives in New Zealand. And so to any of the Kiwis watching here, please, if you meet this man, shake his hand and buy him a beer and give him a big thank you from the rest of us here. We, the sane people in our society. So, anyway, what do you think of the story? Are you going to watch the TV show? Have you watched it on Netflix? Well, I'll reserve any further comments on this, but I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thank you. See you at the next one. Ciao, ciao.